audience, even like at a multiplex, simultaneously, Mita just says, yes. Like, that's what a movie can do. It can make you feel something in a way that, it's harder for an essay or a lot of other, or certainly a news segment to do. Like, movies are about, cinema is about making people feel something. And if you can take an issue that's important for people to learn about and make them feel something, if you care more about gender equality because you feel something seeing cute little Ruth Bader Ginsburg planking for a couple minutes, then, like, amen.
Michael, you've been at this for a while, and I wonder what you think the purpose of your films are.
Well, actually, the first purpose is alluding to what she said, that people work hard all week, and if they get to go to the movies on Friday or Saturday night, as a filmmaker, I mostly want them to feel like when they leave after 2 hours, that they say to each other, wow, that was a great 2 hours. Whatever you got out of it, whether you learned something, whether it was a good laugh, whether it made you cry, whether you had the pit in your stomach and had to throw up when you got home. But I think probably what most filmmakers want, that we've made a great film, and I've always encouraged younger filmmakers who want to make political films to never put the politics first, put the art first. Make a great movie. Make a great movie, and then whatever your politics are, whatever your message is, it's going to carry to so many more people if you put it in the vehicle of great art. If you are just focused on making sure you get exactly the politics the way they should be and make sure they learn this, and then all of a sudden the film starts to feel like a wagging finger or castor oil, and nobody wants that in a movie theater. That's not why you go to the movies. It's okay if you feel that way, but run for office or hold a rally or start a political organization. But why are you making a movie? You're asking people to come in here with popcorn and goobers. Babysitter, the cost of these, I don't know what these seats are, but they've raised the prices to justify this. And this is the last form of populist entertainment where you can literally you cannot afford to go to Madison Square Garden to see a concert. You cannot afford to go to Madison Square Garden and see the New York Knicks. You could not afford. You just go down the list of get out of the house. You can't even afford dinner for two with a little alcohol. It's less than this still. And this is the last place where most people, regardless of their socioeconomic status, can get out of the house for a little bit with each other and experience something that's not of their world. And we cannot let that die. And I'm a huge believer in Netflix and Hulu and the Handmaid's Tale and everything, but because I personally promote the Handmaid's Tale wherever I go. I don't get paid for it. I just think it's a documentary of the near future. So please watch this TV series. But no, I just think that art. You asked this question of where does art and politics, where that convergence is. I think throughout history, it's the artists who have been in the front lines, whether they are writers, whether they're filmmakers, whether they're musicians, whether they're painters, whatever it is, it's been the artists who have been able to be the ones to say first sometimes, this is fucked up. And my art is going to boldly get me in trouble by saying this. And I think that the film on Crime and Punishment, that's a brave film to make. I don't know how many, if you count all the police agencies here, NYPD, Port Authority, TLC, the sheriff, the state, how many cops are there in New York City? 30,000, 40,000?
36,000.
How many?
36.
36,000. Man, that's like an armed camp. That's an army of 36,000 people. And I know a lot of them. They're
with Stephen's photograph on their wall.
Yeah. Well,
Thanks, Tom.
somebody's got to do it. And so you bravely did that. We all know what's going to happen to Roe v. Wade. Everyone in here now knows what's going to happen. And hopefully everybody is participating in groups to be prepared to go to the barricades on this. and to take the position that the government has no business controlling anybody's reproductive organs. End of the story. No compromise. No compromise. And then finally, you know, this film, how much we all learned about Ruth Bader Ginsburg that we didn't know, and you know, you went in the kitchen with her. Her daughter was there, or granddaughter was there, and like, no, she's eating like Kellogg's cereal, and then she's putting that awful Splenda on it, and it's like, no, you have to live, stop, you know. So it's like, but it's like, but the inspiration that film gives to everybody, and you know, I just, you know, I hope that anybody who's played sports knows what that pain is that she's feeling today, and I hope that she's fine, like you said, and because I just tell you, like the thought that nobody will say out loud to you, we're all hoping to see Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the stage at the Oscars. There, I've said it. Okay.
Agreed.
Wouldn't that be cool?
I'm not sure she's allowed to go, but it would be cool. Stephen, talking about your film, Crime and Punishment, you spent several years following these whistleblower cops. The film is now on Hulu. It's reaching an audience as of only for several weeks. It came out in August. Am I right? So, what has that been like for them and for around this issue and just raising more awareness? What have you seen from audiences encountering this film?
Well, I mean, I really agree with what Michael and everyone's really saying, that, you know, you need human stories to unlock complacency. People don't respond to data. They don't respond to really dry journalism. They respond to storytelling. And I think that's kind of our task, right? And that is, in a lot of ways, I feel really heartened that there's a great purpose to being a documentary filmmaker. There, you know, it's only, you know, sometimes sustainable, but it definitely feels more necessary. Bringing the film out to Sundance, you know, we had 20 of the subjects, cops and families, attorneys, and they were flabbergasted. And I was that was the most probably moving moment of my life, watching, you know, people in fur jackets just kind of like respond to a stage full of New York City cops who were completely shell-shocked to be airdropped into this culture. You know, and for Hulu to come around and say, hey, we're going to show this to tens of millions of people across the country, it's inspiring, and it's hopefully this moment that this conversation that has actually been unfolding for many, many years. Some of the cops in the NYPD 12, you know, have been doing this for almost a decade, trying to get the attention of the public, national public, let alone, you know, local New York City public. And there has never been able to be a sustained conversation about police reform, because for some reason, maybe it's like sort of the ongoing demise of civil society intersectionally across everything we know and hold dear, perhaps that distracts us, but whatever the reason, we have to have an ongoing conversation, because when the government, when our elected officials or appointed commissioners are breaking the law, they have to be held accountable, and the NYPD has been breaking the law. And, you know, some people feel afraid to say that for good reason. You know, nobody wants to lose their job on the, you know, when career, you know, the salaries are on the line, families need to be fed. But it's been an incredible honor to kind of go out on the road with the film, with all the cops who, you know, feel really empowered by all of you. But when all of you stop talking about it and sort of look at all of what we're doing as just entertainment, and then we move on to the next kind of like juicy documentary story, that's when these guys lose hope, and the blue wall of silence kind of just comes straight back up, and we actually, you know, go backwards in progress. So that's what I'm trying to understand. You know, how do we keep all of these sustainable conversations, not just sort of like the issue du jour, you know, because it's hot on the festival run or some shit like that.
Annie, with Reversing Roe, that's on Netflix, there is the power of that distribution platform to reach millions and millions of people. It went out into the world in September, so it hasn't been that long that it has been out in the world. But what are you hearing back from the film being out in the world?
We're hearing, well, first of all, social media is kind of crazy, and I'm sure all of us have experienced that now, and sort of the direct communications that we get from people who've seen the film, people who are supporting it, and if you tag yourself and track the thing, all of a sudden you see the currents of how people are starting to talk about it. What I think is really interesting is that we were very open. In our film, we have conversations with people who are anti-choice, pro-life. We allow them to self-identify as pro-life in the film. And, you know, I just want to quickly speak to this idea of how those currents and what you hear come back, because I think what we've all tried to do, and I feel like you did it exceptionally well, is just this idea, Stephen, of like you get inside a world that is not particularly trusting, both of media, of that experience. You're very bold, Michael, about approaching people straight on and putting media right in front of them and whether or not they engage. And then you got the coup of having a private interview in the SCOTUS chambers with RBG. But it's like you're taking people into these very private, personal worlds. And I think once you, as a filmmaker, earn the trust and having that dialogue, it's an interesting dynamic, because now what we're hearing back is we let everybody know prior to the film's premiere at Telluride who was a participant. This is where the film will premiere. We didn't sort of have a private screening for people prior to Telluride. And it was interesting. We got lots of letters of support from the pro-life people saying, let us know how we can help with the release of your film. And what was interesting in the follow-up was that Operation Rescue is promoting the film on Facebook. And so I'm seeing more people sort of responding to it in that way, which I thought was fascinating. In Texas Right to Life, John Segal was pushing it through Twitter and other ways that way. What we are also seeing is a certain sense of, Netflix is an interesting platform to work with. They've been unbelievably supportive, and they have a great, if anyone, is working with them, it makes it really easy for educational stuff to happen now. So there's just like a splash page, and people can connect with a film like that and do an event. So we're getting lots of direct queries. What I think is fascinating, too, though, is there's a statistic in our film. It's hovered between 1 in 4 and 1 in 3 women have had an abortion in America. And I cannot tell you how many emails I've had from people on the pro-life side who say that we are promoting falsehoods. And it's an interesting culture of misinformation. So again, it's like in terms of how the film is reverberating, what the reaction to it is, we're seeing a lot of engagement, but we're also seeing a lot of people continue to push back on what we're presenting as truth in our film. So I don't know if that helps answer the question, but it's an interesting dialogue as a filmmaker. And I also think that to this conversation about when you are allowed to a community, then seeing how people both respond to that community, those conversations are interesting to see how people become vilified, demonized, or celebrated.
We've talked about the way that you want to put art first in these documentaries, and another way of saying art would be people, because there are these great individuals in your film whose lives are being impacted by the subjects in your film and by the making of your film. Michael, in Fahrenheit 11/9, you were following some of the insurgent candidates. Some of them you were following long before the rest of the world had heard of them. Am I right that your cameras were tracking Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez before she won the election?
Yes, we started filming her a few months before the election, and when she was polling about, 3%, and nobody knew her name or whatever. But you don't know what's going to happen when you do that. And Rashida in Detroit, also, we were filming her in advance, and they both won. Richard Ojeda in West Virginia, sadly he lost, but had the biggest flip of turnaround in terms of any Democrat, I think that was on the ballot on Tuesday. Even though he lost, he had really turned that district to being very close to being Democratic in West Virginia. So, yes, I keep my ear to the ground and look for things.
When I had the pleasure to host the world premiere at the Toronto Film Festival, and one of the people that you brought was a woman from Flint, Michigan, who, if anyone who's seen the film will remember her as someone during the water crisis who's being asked to falsify information and stood up against that. And I would love to hear from you about people like that who come up in your films. What the connection you feel to them. These are people who, if your camera hadn't been turned on them, I would not know who that person is. I would not know their story, and now that story will stay with me for life.
That's a really good question. I think that, well, in her case, I guess this happens to me a lot because I'm fairly public, and you can reach me online, and I don't have there's not a lot of people to get through to get to me. So I receive so many emails and things on my site from people that are essentially whistleblowers that want to share this with me, and then would I be interested in making a film about it or whatever. And I actually, it's quite I try not to feel too overburdened by it because I know I can't solve all this and I can't put them on in a film or do a film about their situation. So I feel very close to them in that sense that I feel a huge responsibility in the case of Flint for obvious reasons, personal connections and family and stuff. But sometimes I think about the audience, though, in terms of what I'm doing to them. And I know that when people see this film, they're going to be crushed about President Obama.
Because you do have some criticism for Obama in this film.
It's not, I don't know if it's criticism, I just show what he did. And he depressed the vote in Michigan, along with Hillary, but he did something specifically in Flint by going there and drinking the water and telling people the water was okay when it wasn't. And then after the water crisis started, allowed the Pentagon to essentially bomb Flint, to conduct military exercises to prepare for urban warfare in America by firing missiles into abandoned houses, schools, and having troops paratroop in, come out of helicopters. And after everything that Flint had been through, that they were just target practice for Obama's Pentagon. I knew when people in the theater would watch this that because I can't crush people's spirits. I mean, we're already so low and so full of despair, and I have to, but I cannot not tell the truth, and that the Trump is in the White House in part because liberals and Democrats are responsible for behaviors that allowed for Trump to happen. Starting with liberals and Democrats in this city, who they had 40 years to stop him. 40 years before he was foisted on the rest of us. And I can't, of all cities, talk about a political city, talk about a liberal city, that he somehow never spent a night in jail, never had to answer for his behavior, got to take out full-page ads calling for the execution of black teenagers who were innocent. On and on and on. I swear to God, I promise you this, had he been from Flint or Detroit, you never would have heard of him. He would have been taken care of a long time ago. And I know they're laughing because it is kind of funny, but I'm not, you know me. I'm actually, so, and I think we have to take some responsibility for how Trump happened. So I am worried about, in addition to the people that are in the film, I'm worried about the people who are watching it because, I would have loved to have seen the first woman president take office, and the fact that, and I didn't even put this in the film because I just thought the Obama stuff is going to be so crushing that to remind people that 8,000 African Americans stayed home on election day and didn't vote in Flint only. 90,000 Michiganders went to the polls, most of them Democrats, and stood in line for an hour or two, and then voted for every Democrat on the ballot and left the top box blank. 90,000 Michiganders. She only lost Michigan by 10,700 votes. That's how much they hated her, Democrats, liberals, and hated the Democratic Party. And so, so when she was fed the questions at the Flint debate in Flint, they had mothers of poisoned children go up to the microphone and told them that nobody would know the question. When it was a lie, she was given the questions in advance, and when the mothers of the poisoned children found out a month or two later that it was a rigged debate, questions to Hillary, not to Bernie, they went on TV and said, adios. And then more people stayed home. They didn't vote for Trump, but they said that's it. So I'm sorry it took so long to answer that, but I really, there's always another character in my films, and it's the person in the audience somewhere in America watching this, and I'm constantly thinking about that because they can't leave this theater just wanting to go drink.
Stephen, people have talked about the characters in your film and what a strong impression they make, these whistleblower cops. You talked about the reception that they received at Sundance, and I was with you and two of the subjects in your film at Michael Moore's Film Festival in Traverse City, Michigan, and was impressed by how much they seem to be going out to these festivals. And I did feel with my own eyes that they took a lot away from that experience of having people in white Traverse City respond to their film, for instance. Can you talk to me about the relationship that you had with those subjects, following them for several years? In an earlier panel today, I was talking about what we talk about in documentary film is having a critical distance from your subjects, and I think there's always this line in documentary film where you want to go deep with someone that brings you very close to them, and yet at some point you need to have some critical distance in order to make a film. Can you talk about how you manage that in Crime and Punishment?
Sure. Yeah, the subjects have been really inspired. I think every time they go to a festival like with an entirely white audience that gives them a standing ovation, these cops, all minorities, all the subjects actually, they walk away feeling really energized. And I think that is a testament to this idea that each individual possesses social capital. If you come out and you listen to or watch a film and you express sort of a gratitude, it really does galvanize and re-energize folks like, the subject participants in Crime and Punishment. They have been entirely inspired to keep fighting because of this experience. Obviously, they are driven by years of their own resolve that what they're doing is right. And, they all have expressed that it's, kind of like they've been pushed to the point where it's by any means necessary that they'll continue advocating for this. But I am amazed by them constantly.
Can I dig a little deeper into what relationship you feel with them?
Well, this is about, going on 8 years now that I've known some of them, and in a lot of ways, this was our fourth project. It was born out of some more straightforward visual journalism for The Nation and CNN, and my producing partner and I had just sort of been in the pocket with them after 3 years, and at the point when they decided, a few of them who were involved in the Floyd versus City of New York, federal hearing on stop and frisk, and when there was sort of the national fake out where a federal judge says it's been illegally implemented in New York City. Everyone's like, phew, glad we fixed, racially discriminatory policing and let their guard down. And it turns out, on the streets, on both sides of sort of the police, community divide, plenty of people felt like, well, no, illegal pretextual searches are happening still. They're just not being called stop and frisk anymore. And so they were, the ones that we were in touch with were ready to sort of not be anonymous, silhouetted, murky sources, but just were ready to share completely, transparently their fight. They wanted to.
I was going to say, did they lead that or did you push them that way?
They wanted to. And so our only good fortune and great, luck was to be in position and to be the ones who kept on showing up to keep making these pieces. So, coming from like a verite, filmmaking, character-driven background, that was always secretly what I always had wanted to do, because I always felt like a little bit of a tension between journalism and human-driven storytelling that I wasn't sure what accomplishes, more, and as I was saying earlier. And so this opportunity to just deep dive, follow them around, and then slowly be introduced to more cops because they trusted us at this point, just snowballed in a lot of ways, not because of our doing, but because of this just simple act of like expressing interest and believing them and trusting that there's some sort of like great public interest or urgency actually to see through in their efforts. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but
you're talking about the film in an interesting way, so that's that answers my question. Julie, Michael talked about his needs to show facts about President Obama that maybe his audience.
I thought you were going to say his shame at not doing enough push-ups, but yes. Sorry. Yeah.
The facts about President Obama that maybe audiences don't want to embrace. And when we're engaging in political subjects, there is a range of nuance, and it's not just about heroes and villains. It's about people who are fallible or people who have divergent ways of approaching things. I mean, your portrait of Ruth Bader Ginsburg is largely a laudatory one, but you do get into some more nuanced areas. There is her friendship with Justice Scalia that remains a mystery to most of us. There is a couple times when even, or at least one example I can think of, when even her close friend Nina Totenberg is a little critical of her. I want to ask, because we're talking about making films in the political arena, about exploring the areas that aren't so squeaky clean about the side that you are supportive of.
Absolutely. I mean, I think certainly the unsqueaky cleanest moment in our film, which is something that came about in the sort of when we were in the midst of filming already, was Justice Ginsburg's ill-advised remarks about then candidate Donald Trump, and they were ill-advised. I mean, there's sort of two questions. One is, like, do we include that in the film? There was really no question for us that we would. It was something of interest that happened that really seemed like we couldn't have avoided. And as you mentioned, Nina Totenberg, is right out there saying like she was really appalled by it. So the one question is including it. The other question is, there is a feeling among some of the left American public who agrees so fervently with the justice's critical remarks of Donald Trump that, like, hey, like, but that was a great thing. We actually get that at screenings a lot. People are like, I don't understand. Why is everyone being so critical? Like, Donald Trump is a faker. Like, screw him. Why not just celebrate her for doing that? And in fact, we had a number of sound bites from some of her friends and colleagues sort of being supportive of those remarks. We chose in the end not to include those because we didn't want to muddy the waters of us thinking like, I mean, ultimately it was not something that a judge or certainly Supreme Court justice should be saying, so we didn't want to make it unclear what we thought. Because we had Orrin Hatch, who actually said a number of he's talked about Justice Ginsburg in surprisingly loving ways throughout his interview, including saying we didn't include him saying she was cute and how much he, that he feels love for her. But we did include his remark, which is like, she made a mistake, she apologized for it, she's human. We didn't want to get into talk about like, oh, well, maybe it's okay to say that, because we kind of wanted our point of view to be clear.
Annie, in making Reversing Roe, as you described before, you were really talking to both sides, and I wonder what you brought to those conversations of the staunch pro-life supporters.
Well, when we first started the film, if and when you see the film, hopefully in a nice theatrical experience like this. And by the way, I just wanted to quickly give a shout out because this is such a great way, to your point, about having that collective experience of seeing films like this and then having the conversation. But there's also something as a filmmaker, you want your film to be seen. So I'll talk about that in just a second about what Netflix has allowed this film to do, in particular with Kavanaugh and politics at the time. One of the things we found was that we've never made gotcha filmmaking. I don't think any of us have, except maybe sometimes you, Mr. Moore, like in terms of just going at an issue in someone. But we sat with people where we basically really wanted to hear their point of view, and they were incredibly wary to let us in the door. And we had a conversation with a woman who runs a group called Concerned Women of America, which is an incredibly powerful lobbyist organization. They basically were part of the evangelicals that really got the vote out for Trump, and they are mostly Liberty University graduates. They are big Falwell supporters. They are kind of dyed in the wool of a particular type of evangelical voter. And they have big lists and a fair amount of money. And they move very effectively in particularly redistricted areas, and they get out the vote. So we sat down, we were curious to talk to her about how she wanted to, like how she speaks to abortion, because her entire platform is all about life, as she sort of gets things before her voters. And she asked me point blank, where are you on this issue? And we had lunch, and I have to tell you, it was the craziest lunch ever, because I was very forthright. I said, I come from a position of choice. And she said, well, and she basically asked me, have you had an abortion? And I answered honestly. And I said, yes, I have. And it was the most frank conversation that I had with someone on the other side about what it meant for us to be in dialogue together. And she eventually, we did this really weird interview with her because she has, it's complicated because we ended up not using her interview because it was a very specific political interview. But what I found fascinating about it is that she was willing to help us along the way. She gave us lots of introductions to people. She helped arrange interview space for us with other pro-life leaders in DC. And I think she just appreciated the fact that we had a very honest conversation. She knew that we weren't necessarily going to make an essay film that was completely, our bias, I think, is clear in the film. I look at this as an issue that affects race, class, and equality, and I also think that it's been used politically in a way that is obscene in this country. But I also feel that, the people who we did allow to speak to the life issue, we really were looking at the people who use it for political opportunity. And there was one interview that we did not get that I really wanted. It was with Marjorie Dannenfelser, who runs the Susan B. Anthony list, which is, again, a political motivating list that basically promotes and supports pro-life candidates. And she declined, but she did let us use her office for interviews. It was a really interesting set of conversations. But I think part of it is just, as a filmmaker, you approach people and you are very honest. And we went in from a position of inquiry. We were trying to figure out, is there any compromise on this issue? Can you have a party where you basically, I might have very strong anti-choice feelings, meaning I don't want to see anyone in my immediate community have an abortion, but it's okay, for you to choose that. It's very difficult to see if those two things can live in the same place, so. The one thing I was going to say is that I felt like I didn't really hit your question earlier, and I think you, in particular, Michael, have had such tremendous box office success that as documentarians, we are so grateful because you've proved that films can have a life in a theater. And to see RBG do as well as it's done this year is also, again, a testament to making films that are about big issues, but they really satisfy, and that means something. But the wonderful, crazy thing about our film is that we came out at Telluride, and the Kavanaugh hearings were pushed to early September. And Netflix basically said, let's run with this. This is part of the conversation that's happening right now. Let's go out early, and let's make this part of this larger dialogue. And when you work with Netflix, you're making a film that's available in 26 languages, that can go out to, I can't remember the hundreds of millions of people that it goes out to at the push of a button. And so that kind of immediacy, as someone who might not have a big theatrical distribution behind, that kind of push to get it into that conversation is huge. So, yeah.
It's something that Stephen also enjoyed with Hulu, is that ability to go out to all of their subscribers. We've just got a couple minutes. Michael, let me wind this up with you. A few years ago, you made Capitalism a Love Story, not long after the 2008 financial crash. And at the end of that film, you talked about sort of backing away from filmmaking, that you wanted other people to rise up, that you didn't want to be, the only or most prominent voice out there. Clearly, you've come back to filmmaking, roaring back with Fahrenheit 11/9, and before that, Where to Invade Next. And I'm eager to know where your energies are right now.
Oh, jeez. Do I have to get the honest answer?
Yeah.
I always want to quit. I'm tired. I see 11 people shot in a synagogue last week, 12 people in a college bar this week, and it just constantly goes through my head, what was the point of making that film? Because I remember when we started Bowling for Columbine, and it was the day after Columbine happened, and there had never been a mass shooting like that at a school like that, and I said to my crew, because we were making our TV show, The Awful Truth, and I said, we've got to do this because I'm so worried this is going to become a thing now. And that was our whole motivation, so that it wouldn't become a thing. And now, as we know, it's so much part of daily life that if you turned on the news last night, the killings in Thousand Oaks were maybe the third or fourth or fifth story after the fake attorney general appointment, Ruth's ribs, and a few other things. I don't know. On one hand, I woke up this morning and I thought, oh, you know what? I got to go back to this film that I've been wanting to make, and we sort of started a while ago, of how fortunate it is to be a man right now in this era, that my gender, the one with the missing second X chromosome, it is there, but the fourth quadrant of that second X is missing, so it's a Y. I'm not going to go into the biology of this for you, but that we have been running the show for 10,000 years, and the fact that could change in my lifetime, and that I, as a man, get to witness the end of men, in the sense of running the show. I need to document this. I need to show the end of the white guy calling the shots. And I think it'll be one of the funniest and, yes, and most popular films ever. But but it's all from the white guy's perspective of like, this is like if the dinosaurs had cameras and they could have filmed the end point of them. This is the end of this. And lucky enough for us, it happened in our lifetime. This is such a blessing. But I know you were out of time, but can I ask just a question?
Quick one.
You brought up a great point a few minutes ago. What do we do after we make Bowling for Columbine and things not only don't change, but get worse? Or the blue wall of silence goes back up? Or we end up with 6 appointments. Trump could have 4 appointments by the time he's done in 2021, if he's done then, if he doesn't get a second term. This is such a profound question that he posed of what do we do and how we feel about how we can't, what we can't do about it. But I know you're out of time, but I'm curious to hear if you had an answer to that, or if either of you.
Does anyone have a 1-minute answer to that?
Well, I'll just share one quick thought. I think we've overly relied on our audiences being, literate and being able to connect the dots, and they do, and they can, but I don't think that leads to action. I think that, in some cases of some films, there's like a new burden of responsibility, like filmmakers have to learn how to be impact producers, and I'm an awful impact producer, but I feel like a lot of people ask me, what's your next project? And I'm like, well, I'm trying to make this not just go away, because there's an implication that we're kind of done with Crime and Punishment, and if anything, I'm motivated just by the guilt of feeling like, okay, I spent 4 years filming these guys observationally, and I really owe it to at least them to make sure this is not in vain, because people being like, oh, wow, that's crazy. That guy got retaliated for a winter hat, like. It's really dramatic, and then move on their way is really missing the point that I think we're all trying to achieve, which is, seeing something real shift in not just the culture, but these are all systemic issues. The policy has to be interrogated.
I'm saying as documentary filmmakers, like our lives are hard enough as it is. Let's not set the bar like too high for ourselves. If you can edify and illuminate and make people feel empowered and motivated, and maybe they'll go out and do a little something and respond to what you've created and move the ball forward, 2 yards, like it's not nothing. Like, yeah, some of the problems that we're talking about are like close to intractable. That doesn't mean you shouldn't still push somewhat. It's hard to answer on the Bowling for Columbine thing. Like it's like I'm imagining like the 20-year like sequel is coming out. Like that would be maybe another one that makes people throw up afterwards. So. But like that doesn't mean that just because everything isn't being achieved doesn't mean nothing is being achieved. Let's try to feel like we're going somewhere and keep going there.
Great point. Last word, Annie.
Sandra Day O'Connor had her final letter. She just sort of she's stepping off the stage basically due to her health, and I thought she had a brilliant idea. Civics. Basic civics education, because ultimately we're in a democracy. This can be our society.
It's not in school anymore.
No one teaches it. No one knows how it works. People aren't running for community boards, school boards, any of that. We're just not. Democrats might show up for midterms. They sometimes show up for presidentials. Yeah, it's just like, let's figure out how this government works and make it ours again.
You can see all these films here at the festival on the big screen, the way I think these filmmakers would love for them to be seen. On Monday afternoon, Crime and Punishment will be here at 2:15. On Tuesday, Reversing Roe will be here at 4 o'clock. On Wednesday, RBG will be here at 2:30. And tonight, over at the SVA Theater at 9:15, Michael Moore will be showing Fahrenheit 11/9, followed by a conversation with the filmmaker Marshall Curry and Jeremy Scahill from the Intercepted podcast. I'm going to ask you to flip this theater quickly and take your conversations outside, because we've got another film after this. Thank you very much for coming today. Thanks especially to Stephen Mang, Annie Sundberg, Julie Cohn, and Michael Moore.